I'd like to call this meeting to order, this regular City Council work session of Tuesday, March 6th. The clerk will take the roll.
Mayor Wolcott.
Here.
Vice Mayor Remley.
Here.
Councilmember Duffy.
Here.
Councilmember Hall.
Here.
Councilmember Tandy.
Here.
Councilmember Hayden. Here. Councilmember Winters.
Here.
Thank you.
And if you'll all please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Is there anyone for call to the public?
No, Mayor.
Then we'll move on to the regular City Council work session consisting of 2 items only, so we'll head into the first item.
Presentation and discussion on trends affecting the recycling industry, the processing of recycling locally, and how these trends impact Surprise residents.
Good evening.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. It's our pleasure to be here today, and I have some special guests with us as well. Joining me for the presentation today is the Director of Public Sector Solutions for Arizona, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico for Waste Management. That's Julie Reyes, as well as our local Public Sector Solutions Manager, Clark Landrum. We'll be giving an update on recycling and talking about what's happening in the industry, as well as what's happening here locally. And then I'll kind of add in some things that our local residents can do to help improve the picture as well. Along with being a real critical partner for our solid waste utility, Waste Management is also a large employer within the city of Surprise and taxpayer and property owner. So they're dual hats here with us tonight, right? But without any other hesitation, I'll introduce Julie Reyes to take us through some industry trends.
Good afternoon, Julie, and welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us this afternoon. Feel free in between if you have questions. Myself and Clark will field those for you. But again, as Mike mentioned, we appreciate the opportunity to be here and kind of talk a little bit about the changes in our industry that ultimately impact the city of Surprise and your constituents as well. I've been with Waste Management for a little over 28 years, and I've seen a lot of change happen. But this probably, the changes coming from China have to be probably the strictest that we've seen in a really long time. And we're at a point where the discussions are coming up about should you recycle and should you not. And the direction from us is we still should recycle. It's the right thing for the environment. But I'm just going to give a broad overview of how our export business is impacting us in our local cities here in Arizona. Okay, so just to give an overview, I'm sorry, I have to put my glasses on for my notes. So there are 4 separate policies that China is looking at to reduce overall contamination. And the first one is referred to as the National Sword, or we're calling it locally the China Sword. And really the whole purpose of that is to reduce the contamination and the recyclables that are coming into their country for them to take those materials and then make them into something different. The second item is the ban on 24 materials, and they've went to the World Trade Organization and wanted to ban certain plastics that they felt just either are not reusable anymore or they continue to have a lot of contamination. But the other big issue is, and I have a picture here, you can see the top picture is a bale. That's how we ship all of our product. So it goes on a sort line, it's baled into these bales that are 1,500 pounds, and then they're put on, obviously, to the ports and then on a boat and shipped over. But what happens is there's a lot of folks that have actually been smuggling trash in these bales, and then China has to deal with it. Their landfill systems aren't like ours in the United States or other countries, and so that's another challenge that they've had is there's a lot of trash that people, in their words, are actually being smuggled into the country, and they have to stop that. The other part is that they've listed, and I kind of have a little bit on the slide here, about some restrictions on licensing. So the mills in China actually have to have a license to accept materials that are being shipped into their country. And so they've now stopped and suspended any license for any new mills to accept products except for those that have quotas or customers that they've been fulfilling, and they can show that they've got good material coming in. So they're actually not even allowing the mills to accept materials. And the fourth one, which is the biggest issue that impacts us, is they've reduced contamination levels to 0.5%. And so on the slide I have here, what that equates to is in a ton of recyclable material that they receive, or that we receive, I should say, 0.5 equals 10 pounds. That's nothing, 10 pounds. Our contamination level today from our Surprise residents, which I want to say is very common in a lot of cities in Arizona. It's so Surprise is that contamination level is not anything that's outstanding, but the reality of it is, so with that same measurement, 27% contamination equals 540 pounds, and we're only allowed to have 10. So I'll move on to the next slide and we'll talk a little more detail. So here's the global impact that a lot of folks don't realize is that China is the largest importer of recyclables in the world. So not only the United States, but many countries all ship their materials. Europe actually ships 95% of their plastics to China. And U.S. and Europe are also the largest importers of paper grades into China. And that's one of the biggest things that we see a lot of contamination in, unfortunately, is our paper. 25% of our recycling stream that we accept at our Surprise MRF here is mixed paper is 25%. That's a lot of material that we take in there now, and they're now saying that they don't want to accept any mixed paper. They want everything to be sorted, whether it's newspaper sorted into the bale, like I showed the photo of, or white paper sorted into a bale. They don't want the mixed product anymore because they feel that those are the ones that have the most contamination. And that's 25% of what we collect today, mixed paper. And then the other part is that they're also the largest consumer of recyclable materials, sending us stuff back. So they also take the most recyclables and they make it into new products. And what we've tried to do, at least here locally, is for waste management, we're looking for other international markets, obviously to try to divert materials away from China. So we've been sending some of our stuff to Vietnam, South Korea, Malaysia, and India. So we're trying to find other sources to export our recyclables. We're trying all of these avenues before we get to a point that we say we have to change what we say a resident can recycle at the curb. The hope is this isn't the first time. In 2008, China also put some restrictions called the green fence, and then that slowly dissipated and things kind of went back to normal. So our hope is that maybe in a year or two, they'll lift the ban and they'll allow us to kind of get back to business as usual. But for now, we're trying to find other venues and avenues to try to continue to recycle the material before we have to change what the resident does at home. So kind of continuing on the subject. So obviously, the trends have changed. It's volatile. The prices are different. They're not paying us. There's been a revenue share with most of our cities, including the city of Surprise. So when we sell the product to China, they rebate us a pound per material or pound per ton. And then we have agreements with all of our cities that we share the revenue. Well, obviously with the change in this, they're not paying us what we were getting in the past. I'll share publicly with you. In November and December, our facility here that we recycling material, we were upwards of $150,000 in the hole based on all the material we sold. So everything that was brought into us, we actually lost over $150,000 on that material. So we had to pay to dispose of it. But we're still not cutting anything off. We're going to hang in there and try to find other venues and other outlets rather than change it. But I think what I'd like to reference a little bit more, and you can see the photos. And have any of you had an opportunity to tour the MRF? Have you been there? Okay. So there's some pictures that kind of, if you could see in the photos here, is the sort line, and that's the process. So what's happened, though, unfortunately, to try to meet these restrictions of the 0.5%, we've actually had to slow down the line so it goes slower so the workers on the line can pull off the items that they see as trash. And by slowing that down, we've obviously had to hire more employees, and we've had to, so now we used to have 2 shifts, Monday through Friday, and now we have 3 shifts, including all day Saturday. So we're trying to do as much as we can, but unfortunately, obviously, as we've had to increase our labor costs to try to clean up the material, those costs get passed along to our customers. And so we're in this struggle right now trying to find the right mix. And then the next big piece would be talking about education. How do we educate the residents to clean things up? It's just really different than it was many years ago when recycling started. I don't know if you remember, and I'm not sure if it was this way in Surprise Mike, but in some jurisdictions, at home, we sorted everything ourselves. We had one bin for aluminum, and we had one bin for plastic, and one for your newspaper. And then obviously there was no contamination. It was very clean when we were that way, but the participation was low. So then we shifted to this easy, what we refer to as a commingle program. So you have your blue cart in front of the house and you can just throw everything in, and then the MRFs were built. And then we'll sort it for you. So we'll make it easy for the resident, but then we'll do the work on the back end. And as we've kind of mentioned, it's just become a little more complex. Gone are the days of, if you're not sure, throw it in the recycle bin. Now the motto has to change to, when in doubt, throw it out. And that's really, Keep America Beautiful is pushing that. SWAN is pushing that, to the new slogan of, when in doubt, keep it out, which is a complete shift of how we were going the other way, because we wanted to encourage more recycling. But what we're finding is we're getting more trash or more items that are actually not recyclable. And so I think the biggest push that we have today, and that we're doing a lot of these presentations and having discussions with your staff, is that we really have to kind of go back to basics and really push quality. We see that from what we're hearing from our folks, our lobbyists that work with China, is that nothing's going to change this year. It's still going to be extremely volatile. So our focus really has to be the quality of the materials that we're getting from the residents to try to clean that up. I wanted to share with you, we made a point of saying that Waste Management hasn't dropped any material from our curbside programs. There are other recycling facilities in Arizona, Colorado, and Utah specifically that are actually, if you look at the bottom of a bottle or on the side of the bottle, it has a number, and it's 1 through 7, a plastic specifically, 1 through 7. Most all these bottles are 1. Most of the stuff that's in the refrigerator, like your ketchup bottle, your mustard bottle, those are a 2. And then anything with a wide mouth is 3 through 7. So that could be like your Folgers coffee can. It could be detergent bottles. Most folks are actually, because that is some of the contamination, they're actually removing that from their waste stream and only taking bottles. We don't want to do that, because again, we hope that that will change. It's good material. But right now with the ban, folks are taking it out of the waste stream. And what we're trying to do, as I mentioned, using these other countries, we're trying to find other outlets to not do that, because it took us so long to get residents and the public to realize that you can recycle your Tide detergent bottle or your cleaning supply bottles. It took us so long to get there. And like I said, we're going to try to hang out as long as we can to keep our programs the same.
So if I may, the issue, it seems to me like those higher number plastics are a higher quality of plastic, or perhaps a more advantageous recyclable product. But the issue seems to be that people aren't washing them out and preparing them, so that's what's contaminated. So it might be the ketchup that doesn't get rinsed out of the bottle, or the mustard, or the mayonnaise, or the laundry detergent doesn't get rinsed out. So that's something that I think that we need to work together to educate our residents about not throwing food products into the recycling waste stream.
That's a huge one, because let's just say the jar is open. Okay, so we'll just use the example of, I'm just trying to think of what's in the refrigerator that can come out. Let's just say a pickle jar. Let's just say you have a pickle jar and you still have some juice left. Well, it gets into the truck compacts once the material gets in the truck, and now you have juice and pickles leaking all over the mixed paper and the cardboard. Now that material is completely contaminated. And that's what goes towards the 0.5%, which is hurting us. The other issue is, and I have a couple photos, this is what we see come in. I get that the resident's thinking, oh, this is wood, I can recycle it. But it's not part of the curbside recycling program. There's probably other places that you can take to recycle some wood. So I think I think the resident has good intentions of thinking, oh, I want to recycle this wood. I don't know if it's a screen door or what it is, but those are the type of materials that we get. Something that size, we're able to pull off the sort line. But if it's broken up into pieces, those go on the sort line. They might fall into the mixed paper area. They go in the bin. You know, they get baled. They go to China and they do like a scan of things. Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to touch on. When the products are shipped to China today, what they do is they do an inspection. So they come in the big C container. So they open up the C container. They only test a few bales, and if a few of the bales are contaminated, they reject the whole load, and it has to be sent back. They don't go through every bale. They're just testing a few of them and saying, oh, well, the rest must be all contaminated as well, and then we have to take it back and dispose of it. So that's another piece to that. So
Have you
yes,
done
Mayor.
have you done any tracking about how much of the product that that we recycle here has actually been packaged and shipped to us from markets like China?
No.
That might be interesting to know.
I
just
don't know that
because
we
of
could-
the current environment that we're
Sure,
working on.
sure. We probably could quantify it in tons, but not probably specific to surprise, because your
Right,
stuff gets
that
obviously
does-
bundled with others.
right.
But I could probably get some stats and
Would be
share
good
that
to
with
know.
you.
Thank you.
So, and then the other photo is here's the other thing that's really hard is that you see bags of shredded paper, and that's the other big thing. And I think it was in a couple slides back. The bottom picture here, plastic bags are terrible for our equipment. They just get stuck in it. It's kind of like the same thing with your vacuum cleaner. You're vacuuming and there seems to be a shoestring or something and it jams up the vacuum and it stops. It's the same thing. When our sort line and all those are all plastic bags that folks bag their material, their recycling, and they put it in their blue cart. That's what happens, and that actually shuts down the line for 4 hours to clean that out. So we have to go in there with cutters and try to get it out. And so that's the other thing, again, plastic bags are recyclable, but you need to take them back to the grocery store. You need to take them back to Walmart or Target because there is a market for them, but in bulk. So they have to. So if you were to take all those bags back, and outside every grocery store, they have the little cans that you can put your bags. When they're shipped in bulk, there is a market for it. But what happens is when they get in the trash truck or the recycle truck, they get busted, they get broken down, and then they get jammed in the machine. So they'll never get recycled anyway because they become little bits and pieces. And so I think that's the other difficult part with the new messaging is in the past, we used to encourage people to bag their recyclables so the stuff didn't blow out of the trucks. There's a natural thing. There are screens on trucks that help prevent from stuff blowing out, but on a windy day, things still blow out of the trucks. You can't keep it completely. So now the messaging is no bags. You can bag it in your house, but when you go out to your blue cart, just dump it in and take the bag back in the house with you. And that's different than what we've told in the past. But now it goes to the next slide with the picture I was showing about the shredded paper. You have to bag shredded paper. There's no other way to bag shredded paper, but we can't take that bag anymore. So that's the other thing. And, we've talked with staff about maybe that's one thing that we pull out of the waste stream and work with the city to do shred events where there's a truck that comes in and you dump your shred into a specific vehicle so it doesn't get mixed in with all the other materials. But even that shredded paper, same thing with the pickle jar scenario that I gave, that paper just becomes green and contaminated once it gets mixed with anything else. So, like I said, our goal is to continue to meet with your staff, with Surprise, and talk about how we can educate, outreach. And I think really that's what we have to do is we have to get the message to the residents on what they can do to help. Unfortunately, recycling years ago used to be free, and now there's a cost for processing recycling to keep up with the costs to meet the demands of exporting the materials into other countries. What we don't want to do is we don't want people to think, well, I should just throw it away. Recycling is still the right thing to do. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It preserves our landfills. I think the biggest thing to think about is we do have a landfill here in Surprise that we operate. There are many landfills in the state of Arizona. I don't know how many, Clark. Do you know? There are a lot of landfills. So here's the problem. Nobody wants a landfill in their backyard. So if we stop recycling, we're going to have to build more landfills because they're going to fill up faster. And the goal is the opposite. The more we recycle, the longer the existing landfills have life, and we don't have to build new ones. And then, I'm actually an Earth Day baby. So for me, it's important that we preserve the environment, for many years into the future. but it's definitely a challenge, and it seems like I would probably say, I don't know, within the last 2 months, it's really come more to the forefront that more folks are hearing about it. They're reading. There's a little bit coverage on TV, but it's definitely a challenge. But we're here to help, and
I have another
try to make
question for
change.
you from Councilmember Tandy.
Thanks. Mine's an easy one. So what do we do with shredded paper then? Do we bag it? Do we throw it in the trash?
So we'll still
What do we
take
do?
it, but we'd say take it out of the bag. Just dump it into
Dump
the
it in.
recycle cart.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on your plastic bag, have you engaged with our state legislature about plastic bags? Because that was an issue that really tangled us up as cities, because one city tried to be a leader and
Yeah.
ban the use of plastic bags, and they got crossways with the lobby at the state legislature. So have you expressed your concerns about how this is? I mean, that is a very telling picture with those spools
Yeah.
all completely
Yeah.
wound up with plastic
Yeah.
bags. It kind of reminds me of a carpet sweeper that gets all bound up with
Exactly.
carpet.
Same
It's
exact
just the
thing.
same thing,
Same
and
thing.
you're totally shut down trying to repair it. So, have you had that conversation with the legislature?
We have not personally. I mean, we see if you were also to take a tour of the landfill, or you were to look at your highways, what's the one thing you see up against the fence? Plastic bags. Those are the things that seem to get away and they blow around. I'm actually a transplant from Southern California. That's where I had the majority of my career. And in California, the state regulates recycling diversion goals. And because of that, it took them 3 years, but they finally did pass the plastic bag ban 2 years ago statewide, that no one can have plastic bags. They're all reusable bags. So it's very touchy. There was a lot of protest even in California. I would probably say we need it from both. We need it to come from our side, but we also need it to come from the municipality side as well. And I know, and I'd probably say band together, whether it's through MAG or through SWANA. That's probably the best avenue to try to gain some support instead of one going forward on their own.
Well, I agree with you, and I think that the cities do have opportunities through those organizations, but I please don't underrate your ability as Waste Management, which is a pretty doggone big company, to be able to sway some opinions at the state legislature, because this is an important issue, and it boggles my mind to see how much recyclable waste enters our landfills because people go, I mean, I probably recycle 80% of what comes into my house gets recycled and put back in that bin. Very little do I throw into the trash can.
Yeah, you'd be shocked if you see the reverse. If you saw a trash load, you'd be shocked by the amount of cardboard and other plastic items that people don't recycle. So,
okay. Anyway. Councilmember Winters.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, you stated what I was going to say, that California banned plastic bags a couple of years ago. Do you think that's the answer?
Oh, it has changed. It has increased. It has increased the amount of, I should say, it's improved the contamination levels. But we've seen a decrease. I'm just speaking very honestly. It improved contamination, but it decreased participation because folks said, well, forget it then. I'm not going to put my dirty stuff loosely in my can because then I'm going to have to wash my recycle bin more often. So after the law passed, we actually did see a decline in our diversion percentage from some of our cities, which is the opposite of the whole point of why California did that. They wanted to ban plastic bags from the waste stream, but we saw it go the opposite way. Now that was 2 years ago when things have slowly changed, but some residents said, well, forget it. I'm not going to loosely bag my recyclables or throw them in a can, and then I'm going to have insects or other things. So it's a catch-22.
Okay. Thank you.
So just to add on to what Julie said, so she's talking about China and markets and contamination rates and pretty cool high speed manufacturing processes and those kind of things. It's clear that recycling is easy to do is an expired message. That's that for decades. That's what we said. It's easy. Now, even though it's complicated, it's still worthwhile. And this is an example of in January what our recyclables added up to. So in the city of Surprise, 918 tons of cans, bottles, paper, and cardboard were recycled. That's the equivalent of 8,300 mature trees, saving 3,400 cubic yards of landfill space, which would serve 4,300 households for a year. Over 2 million kilowatts of electricity, 4 million gallons of water, and of course, a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So if the message you hear tonight is well, recycling is too complicated now, that is not what we were trying to say. Recycling is worthwhile. And sure enough, I'm looking forward to the results of our current national citizen survey that's going on, but recycling has proven to be an extremely popular service in the city of Surprise. Our residents really, really appreciate it and like it. And so we want to keep doing it. And in order to do that, we need to be good partners with our partners to minimize the costs involved and to maximize the benefits of recycling. So we do have an education campaign. A couple of years ago, council approved some increased staffing and resources for recycling, and our marketing team came up with these really cool boards that go on the side of our garbage trucks and that we can use on social media. And some of our social media posts on RecycleWise in Surprise, that's the page for this program, will get as much reach as 8,000 people. So the people do see it. What we've also learned, though, is education by itself doesn't move the needle. And so in communities around the country that are dealing with curbside contamination, which is every community around the country, the way to move the needle and improve things is to partner education with enforcement. And so we are going to be doing that here in Surprise. So in the past, a person can say, hey, you missed my recycle container. And instead of picking it up, you actually left some tag on it. And we would come back and we would service them and say, please do better next time. So we'll say, no, you need to take care of it now. You need to move that into your trash container and you need to put clean recyclables in it. So that's going to be a change of focus in how we deliver services here to our residents. Recycling, it can still be done right. The three key things that our residents can do differently with recycling that would help us is recycle all their empty bottles, cans, and paper. So we're not saying stop recycling or reduce recycling. We're saying recycle right. And so empty bottles, cans, and paper. Remove food and liquids. We don't want food and liquids. That ruins our recycling. And then the big one, keep plastic bags out of recycling. So we significantly increase the cost of processing beyond just putting a junk item into the mix by putting our plastic bags in there. We have to get rid of our number one contaminant in Surprise, which is plastic bags. You heard Julie earlier say, when in doubt, leave it out. So we have most of our residents doing a great job with recycling. So I don't want to make the mistake that we're all bad recyclers, because that's not the case. And in fact, most of us are doing a good job. Let's keep doing it. But we have extremes on either side of that. On the one side, we have the pro recyclers who are like, we should be able to recycle that. We got to be able. Yeah, that's clearly recyclable. Put it in there, And like a steel wheel rim from a car. Steel's recyclable. It is not in curbside recycling. We cannot take car parts in curbside recycling. So those do-gooders, we need to help them understand you're not helping us. You got to appropriately recycle right. And then on the other side of it, we still have people who say, that's a second trash container. I'm going to use it for trash. And so we're going to work real hard to educate them very personally by disrupting their day when they come home and their container's not been emptied and they have a tag saying, oops, and please help us by making this change. What we've seen in areas around the country that are focused, especially on plastic bags, is we've seen as much as an 80% reduction in plastic bags in the recycling stream. And that coupled together with that, actually, they recycle more because this education with the disruption changes their behavior and helps them understand what we want. And some of them actually increase the recycling enough that those communities have increased tonnage of cleaner recycling, which is what we want for the city of Surprise. And then Clark had a couple of comments about locally what we're doing here as well.
Yes.
Welcome, Clark, and we were not ignoring you.
So thank you, Mayor and Council. Once again, my name is Clark Landrum. I'm the local public sector solutions. I'm the liaison between the city and waste management. So thank you for your time today. I've been in the waste industry 18 years, and just kind of wanted to summarize, a couple of Julie's points and Mike's. And number one, it's really the being stewards of the environment. And I like to say that in regards to the quality of product that we're trying to achieve through education and really through the supply and demand that we're seeing and the challenges that we're facing. Julie brought up earlier about the international point. And I just wanted to briefly make sure that you all aware that waste management is looking domestically. I'm looking regionally and locally for suppliers of these commodities, and is there an opportunity to keep them local? But we have to look out long term in regards to the opportunities there as well. It's kind of funny we talk about not being complex, but I spoke with earlier with Governor Ducey, and Julie and I came from a luncheon with Mayor Stanton and talked about the preservation of water and water resources. So as we spoke about recycling, now we're talking about washing, the plastics out and making sure they're clean. So it's kind of a double-edged sword when you look at that in regards to both sides of it. So you got the water now that we're using up to make sure the recycling's clean. So needless to say that we do have plenty of challenges in the forefront ahead of us. But as waste management looks at the education process of going forward and the feedback we get from the municipalities, we'll certainly make sure that we continue with the processes in place. The only last thing that I would add is the plastic bags, Mayor, that has been brought up in the past. We spoke about that. It kind of got set to the side. So I think it's now an opportunity to go back and certainly revisit that once again with our state legislators. But as we see this become a more of a point in regards to our state.
Great. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. And I completely agree. I mean, I think engaging with them is really important. I think they need to understand the value of recycling as well. And, I applaud, cities like Bisbee who tried really hard to do something that do the right thing, but then were punished for doing the right thing. So I think if we're all on the same page and work together to try to better educate the public, you brought up a great point. Rinsing the jars now creates another resource that's not the highest best use for that resource. So how do we recapture that resource and mitigate that problem? So I do appreciate how complicated this has become, but we want to make it as simple as possible and user friendly as possible for our residents so that they are compliant and as well as eagerly recycling and doing it right. So thank you for that. Do I have any other questions from the council? You guys did a great job.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you once again.
Our next item.
So the next item is discussion pertaining to the fiscal year 2019 budget.
Good evening. No, good afternoon. How are you doing?
Great, thanks. Good afternoon,
Good.
Madam Chair, members of the council. Thank you for inviting us back once again to present our third in our segment on our fiscal year 2019 budget process. In this, we will be talking this evening about sources and reserves. We will be discussing the reserves, reviewing all funds as well as the general fund and the new structure that was adopted by the mayor and council per our recommendation last year. We'll discuss the importance of the general fund and its role in the city budgeting process. And we'll also go through and review the city's general fund sources in greater details and talk about the decision points on those funds as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Holly.
Good afternoon. We are going to go through the reserves and our reserve policies that we have on all of our variety of different funds. So last year we adopted our comprehensive management policies to include minimum fund balance policies and make sure that those are updated. We also have debt requirements that are required per some of our outstanding debt that we have to have a certain amount in funds. And then we also have our fund balance that's not intended to be spent. That's to ensure the city has adequate resources. So we have a drawdown plan if we do need to dip into those reserves, and we'll go over each one of those. And then most of the uses of our funds, except for one reserve, requires council approval. So you guys will see all of those come through. And then our total FY18 reserves are $38.6 million. So we'll break down each one of those and what funds they go into and what the purpose of those funds are. So starting with our smaller dollar funds, when I say $1 million, that's our smaller dollar ones. Our general capital fund is $1 million. Transportation improvement is $500,000 that we have in reserves. Spring training ticket surcharge is $600,000. Our tourism fund is $5,000. So risk management fund is $300,000. Workers' compensation by the end of this fiscal year will need to be $1.5 million. And we established workers' compensation last fiscal year, if you remember. So we had a year to get that reserve balance up. And then our streetlight improvement districts, or SLIDs, are 5% of those expenses that are going through. So our general fund, how we structure the reserves is it's 2 months worth of operating expenses. So that's personnel, that's supplies, services, and that's the general fund, and that's also HERF. So I will show you that's broken down into 3 different components, and we'll go into that since that's our largest dollar amount of reserves in a couple slides. And then our utility funds have the same restringents on the reserves. It's 2 months worth of all the operations, so personnel, supplies, services, and then 2% of tangible assets. Part of our debt requirements are also from our utility funds, and that our sewer debt from 2007, we're required to have $5 million worth of reserves there. So you can see in our utility funds, we do have the 12.5, so we meet that reserve. So out of our general fund, that $18 million, we have it broken down into 3 categories. We have our operating reserves, which is 10% of the 16%, a budget stabilization reserve, and an emergency reserve. So these are, you would see these if we ever came to council needing action, except for the emergency reserve. And I'll show you how that one works in just a second. But these reserves will be met or asked for after we've exhausted all fund balance, all other needs, all operating capital, all the different funds we could go to. This would be our last resort. We would come to you in the use of these. So first one is our largest, the 10%. It's our operating reserve. The purpose of this reserve is for unexpected events. So this is more of mandates that come through that we didn't see, legislation that's got passed, or something happened with state shared revenues that we didn't foresee coming, just changes in legislation or loss of state shared revenues. So to get that done, we would come to council, we would tell you we went into the reserves, or we need to go into the reserves. We exhausted all other options, so this is why we're here. And then we would come with a plan of a 2-year fiscal replenishment fund. So we would use it in this fiscal year, and then we would give ourselves 2 years to replenish it per our reserve policy. So our next one is our budget stabilization reserve. This is, the purpose of this is to use funding to offset reductions of revenue. So whether it's charges for services, franchise fees, things that we were counting on in the budget process that didn't come through as expected, then we would ask council for approval to go into these again after all other options had been exhausted. This is a 3 fiscal year replenishment. So we would give ourselves 3 years to try to build up that fund balance. Hopefully we could do it quicker than that, but get that reserve back up. And that's that's $5 million worth of reserves. And then our last one is our emergency reserves. And the purpose of this one is unexpected funding that we need to come through that definitely we need to do for the health of our residents and the safety of our residents. This one, the city manager can authorize the spending of the $1.8 million of this But when he authorizes this, he would come back to council and tell you the plan of the 1-year replenishment and how we plan to get it back. So this doesn't follow the council approval process just because emergencies don't typically fall in line with the council adoption process. So that one is the only one that's a little bit the ones that you wouldn't see, but it would definitely come to you with a plan of how to get that reserve back up and that funding back up in that next fiscal year. So that is the $18 million worth of the general fund reserves and the purposes of what we allocate those for and the funding plans and replenishment plans of that. So the general fund, I know we've talked about in the last several of these meetings, all of the funds and their importance of the fund. We're ending the series of the funds with our general fund because it is the largest of all the funds that we use. And it can also be used for any purpose. So you'll see a lot of our internal services of public safety are housed in there. So 38% of our expenditure budget is in the general fund. 62% of the operating budget is in there, and 81% of personnel costs are in the general fund. So we'll break down how each one of the funds roll up and how we use that, I think, $124 million. So looking at it by fund, we'll look at public safety is 40% of that, and that's their operating personnel, all of those expenditures that can be used. General government is legal, city manager, finance, HR, all the other different departments, the internal departments that work on there. We also have community services, which is 14%, and that's community and recreation services and human HSCB. We'll go with that one. And then there's 6% for public works, which is facilities and fleet. And then community development is community development, and economic development is also in there. And then 17% of transfers out, and we'll break down the transfers out in 2 slides from now.
Before you move forward, I have a question from Councilmember Hall.
Sure.
Yeah, on the replenishment, can you give me an example? Let's say fiscal year 19, you come to us and you need to use the budget stabilization, whatever, okay. So that would be replenished in fiscal year 22, by fiscal year 22?
By fiscal year 22.
By fiscal year 22. That's the 3. Okay,
and then,
thanks.
And keep in mind, too, I forgot to mention the fact that with the reserves, as our budget increases, our reserves increase, too, because it's that 2-month percent. So it's $16 million or $18 million now. If our budget grows, that reserve fund will grow, too. So that money will grow. So. One more. Yep. So how these departments are funded from the general fund, we break down the percentage. So public safety, you can see, is 94% supported by the general fund. So fire, police are very general fund heavy. There's some grants in there that offset those, but mostly they're funded out of the general fund. General government is 47%. We also have some grants that offset those funding mechanisms. Community services is 81%. Public works is the 35% because they have the sanitation in there too that is in their department, but they have other funding sources. Community development is primarily funded out of the general fund, and water resource management is not. So we had talked about the 17% of the general fund is made up of transfers out. So what that consists of is $2 million annually on our debt service payments. We also have an asset replacement, at least in FY18, of $4.5 million. So that is to fund all the other departments' needs for that. Computer replacements, that's replacing building issues, concerns, park equipment, different types of things like that. So our asset replacement, we have vehicle replacement. We have $1 million in ongoing, but we also have 3.7 in one-time funding. So that is replacing fire trucks, police cars, all the other different vehicles that we use in the city. And then we have a capital improvement plan for FY18 of $9.5 million. Our net premium seating is an ongoing of $100,000. Workers' compensation was the one-time funding of that new fund that we have for a total of $3.1 million of ongoing transfers out, but $17.8 million of one time. So we'll break down the one time and ongoing and the differences and the importance of the two. So the ongoing is...
Before you go forward, I have a question from Vice Mayor Remley.
Thank you, Mayor. What's net premium seating?
Madam Chair, Vice Mayor Remley, the net premium seating is an obligation that we have with our facility use agreements with the Royals and the Rangers. And there is a fund that is allocated for capital improvements to the facilities, and they each have a say and a share of those capital improvement funds. Those contracts obligate us to fund $100,000 a year for those. And the revenue that comes in from those premium seating areas within the stadium only covers a portion of that source. So it's actually subsidized by the general fund, and it's for just capital improvements to the stadium and the clubhouses.
So we pay an extra 100,000 out of the general fund?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So our ongoing funding it's consistent, it's stable. So those ongoing sources we identified, that those $3 million of transfers out, we're going to anticipate those exact dollar amounts coming through next year. Obviously, some things change with fluctuation, but we would know that those things are coming, they're recurring, and those types of things will fund year after year. The sources, we make sure that we have the revenues to support that. The difference of the one-time funding, the asset replacement, the capital, that's inconsistent. That's leftover fund balance. That's additional revenue we brought in. So it's not anything that we could put a salary on or put something on that's going to be an ongoing program. We couldn't implement a new program with one-time funding. So that's why we use it for asset replacement. That's why we use it for capital vehicle replacement, new things or replacing old things, but not anything ongoing or anything we would sustain.
So in the next section, we're going to go ahead and take this look at the general fund, where we look at the revenues, each one of the different sources, where they come from, and the council's authority to change those revenue sources. We'll look at the transfers in, and we'll look at the fund balance. We'll talk about how fund balance is generated and the importance of using that fund balance in the city's budget. Our total general fund sources, that you can see from this, is $124.9 million. So that's the total amount we're talking about. As we look at the next couple of slides, we'll talk about the budget, which was the amount that was approved by the mayor and city council for fiscal year 2018, including any amendments. And in some cases, we're looking at 17. The actual is the amount that has actually been received or spent. The estimate is the amount that we're planning for the future. So that's our 2019 amount. And then, or the estimate is for the current year, and the projection is for the future year, 2019. So when we look at that piece of pie that represented fund balance at 15%, we'll talk about where that comes from. The fund balance is generated when sources, all of the money coming in, exceeds uses in prior fiscal years, all of the money going out. And so we save that money in the general fund and use it for future purposes. And as Holly just said, we distinguish between the ongoing and one-time uses with the one-time source. So this is a one-time source. It's used for one-time expenses. So for example, the fiscal year 2018, if we find that our actuals overall exceed our estimate, then we have additional money that falls to fund balance. And we use that for future asset replacement, vehicle replacement, pavement preservations, other capital items, or to pay down our pension liability as we did last year. When we roll back to the slide that Holly was talking about, where we talk about these transfers out, you can see that planned in our operating budget, we only have an ongoing source for $2 million of debt service payments and $1 million of vehicle replacement, and that $100,000 of net premium seating. Most of our other uses for one time for asset replacement, vehicle replacement, and our capital projects that are outside of our general obligation bonds are using general fund sources. They're using that general fund savings, that one-time savings that's generated when we don't spend all the money that we had budgeted. We budget very conservatively, so we know that there's generally excess each year. But that money is very important to us in helping pay for these assets, vehicles, and capital items, The other source for those is our construction sales tax. And so we generate that from growth, but when that is insufficient to pay for each one of these things, we rely on the general fund to make transfers to those capital funds in order to make sure that we can maintain what we already own as well as construct anything new outside of our general obligation bond funding. So when we look at where we ended fiscal year 2017, we had estimated that we would have a beginning fund balance of $41 million. After all was said and done, we ended up with $38.8 million. It was a change in the way that we had accounted for a development agreement that caused that reduction in that fund balance. Our total sources on the good news side were greater than we had originally anticipated, to the tune of $2 million. And also good news, our total uses were less than we had anticipated by a total of $2.4 million. So overall, we were up compared to where we had estimated as we were completing the budget for fiscal year 2017. So that means rolling into this fiscal year, we had savings of $2.2 million. Now, as you might recall, we brought to you in the fall an action asking for authority to use that money for the pension contributions for the refunds that were made as a result of the statutory change that was overturned through the courts. And so we have already used the $2.2 million savings that was generated in 2017. So a lot of what we will need for paying for asset replacement, vehicle replacement, and other capital sources for next year relies upon savings in 2018, since we've already accounted for the full savings of 2017. So just wanted to help make that point clear and share that point for the residents, that through the prudent use of their budgets through the departments, that's how we achieve the savings to pay for what we need to take care of our equipment and our infrastructure. Mm-hmm. Another thing that we look at in the budget, and you'll often see it as part of the agenda as we go through the fall, you'll see an item on your consent agenda, are our carry forwards. So we estimate that all of the budget for a particular project will be spent in the current fiscal year. So anything appropriated in 2018, we say all of that's going to be spent by the end of 18. Well, some things, with the example of a fire truck, take longer than a fiscal year to replace. So we may order it and there's a long lead time. It might take a year for us to actually receive that item while they're constructing the fire truck to our specifications. So while we know that we may have budgeted $700,000 for that fire truck in fiscal year 2017, by the time we receive it in 2018, we had only spent $286,000 of that in 17. And so the rest of that money is carried forward as part of the budget, and it's not new money. It's just the balance of the money that wasn't spent. And we do transactions to move those up and down, but overall the total amount for that fire truck stays the same. It's just a timing issue. But we see that on one-time items, long lead items, and occasionally on often on capital projects and occasionally on grants. Grants are often aligned with the federal fiscal year, which starts on August 1st and ends in September. It doesn't align with the city's fiscal year, which starts in July and ends in June. So oftentimes we have to carry forward grant amounts as we finish out the federal fiscal year for federal funding. Okay. So overall, looking at the general fund sources and looking at the history of that trend, starting in fiscal year 2013, we saw about $84.5 million in sources for the general fund. Up through fiscal year 2018 budget, we're budgeted the adopted budget at $106.2 million. We'll break that down further into the different categories and talk about the sources of those funds and how that may be changed by the mayor and council policy direction. So looking at it by category, you can see those year-to-date amounts. This is as of the November report, which I presented to you at the last regular council meeting. So I won't go into depth on those, but in general, we are above our budget. Some timing, some actual increases through development mostly. Okay, if we take a look at our local sales tax, we have our transaction privilege tax is what it is technically called, though we call it local sales tax. So if you hear TPT, this is what they're referring to. Our current rate is set at 2.2%, and that generates for the general fund approximately $42.7 million for the fiscal year 2018. It's broken down into different categories, and each one of those different categories may have a different rate. A few of those categories are listed. Our construction sales tax, we have a policy through the mayor and council's direction that we've had for a number of years where, because growth can vary, we don't consider the full amount of our construction sales tax to be ongoing. We consider only a portion of it to be ongoing, and that is the first $1.25 million. And so we haven't dropped below that amount in a number of years ever. And then the remainder of that is collected is what is deposited in the general capital fund. And that's what otherwise pays for our assets, our vehicles, and any other capital construction. So if there's a street that the city is responsible for, that's largely the source. And so all of those different uses compete for these sources, the general fund one time and the construction sales tax. These tax rates, the 2.2%, and whatever dedicated rates we have for different categories may be changed with council authority. And it's about a 120-day process from start to finish, including council action notice, and then the coordination with the state in order for us to change the rate. So this is the history of the local sales tax. Without any change in rates, we have seen it grow as the economy recovers from the $32.1 million up through the fiscal year 2018 budget of $42.7 million. The intergovernmental revenue.
Before you move forward,
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Winters.
Thank you, Mayor. Lindsay, you say the sales tax is 2.2%, but actually the resident pays 8.5%, correct? Made up, that's from county tax and the state tax, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Winters, that is correct. The city's share of the total tax is 2.2%. It is 8.5%, a majority of that being made up by the state, and the remainder of it is collected by the county.
Okay, so how much state tax is in there?
The state collects 5.6%, I believe.
5.6, and the county is
the balance. I want to say it's 0.7.
0.7. Okay, thank you.
Yes. So moving on to the next category, intergovernmental revenue. Madam Chair, Councilmember Winters, I'm glad you bring up our how much the state has on that sales tax, because they do distribute a share of the sales tax that they collect back to cities and towns. And they include income tax as well. So we know with all of our biweekly payrolls, we pay both federal income tax as well as state income tax. And then we know come April 15th, it's tax time. And it's time to make sure that those amounts you've paid out through the year are correct. So you either get a refund or maybe you owe, but we get an amount of that, the state's income tax, as well as vehicle license tax. So every time you go down to the MVD, the Motor Vehicle Department, to register your vehicle, you pay a share of vehicle license tax. Maybe you do it online or maybe you do it through one of their third-party providers. We get a share of that as well. And each one of those are distributed to the cities and towns based on population. Our current share of that is 2.4%. And as you know, it's subject to change by the legislature. So as we are going through the legislative session, as we are now, we are always having our eye to their actions, because often, as we know, when they have challenges with their budget, they have pressure on these sources. So we want to make sure that we keep an eye on those and ensure that we maintain this revenue. It's a large portion of the general fund. It makes up almost 30% of the general fund, our state shared revenues. So we don't have any authority to change those amounts, but we're often always watching the state legislature. Madam Chair.
I have a question from Vice Mayor Remley.
Thank you, Mayor. As you indicated, the state shared sales tax is divided up based on population. Based on what population numbers?
Madam Chair,
Question is, yeah.
Madam Chair, Vice Mayor, I'm glad you asked. Those numbers have been updated. They used to be based on census, mid-decade and decade census numbers, but we had a change to that state statute, and they are now updated annually based on annual estimates through the Maricopa Association of Governments and the U.S. Census.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great question. Okay.
So we can see those intergovernmental revenues have grown from $26 million in fiscal year 2013, kind of towards the bottom of the downturn we had, through the current fiscal year at approximately $34.2 million is the amount that was adopted with the budget. The charges for services are fees for specific programs. We have $9.8 million in the fiscal year 2018 budget. Great example, we've been talking about a lot lately, and we had an update to it this fiscal year, are those development-related fees. So those permit and plan review fees, landscape inspection fees. So we did increase those fees, and along with that, we've seen an increase in both revenue and an increase in activity, which has increased it as well. It's also common in recreation programs to have these sorts of fees, and they're set to recover a portion or all of the costs. In most cases, it's typically a portion of the costs. And council authority takes 60 days notice before council can take action on these fees, and then it's 30 days before they become effective. And so we have a formal process for that, and we will be looking at the next fiscal year, we'll be looking at updating the recreation related fees. It's been some time since those have been brought before council and since they've been updated, and that's an opportunity we'll be looking forward to in the future fiscal year. Other than that, we do not have any plans for any changes to any other charges for services or any recommendations to council for consideration in this category. You can see that in fiscal year 2013, we had about $10.6 million. And in fiscal year 2018, we see that it's about $9.8 million. There's a number of moving factors that have caused that number to change. But as we separate funds and as we created sports and tourism, you'll see changes in this number as we move forward and how much is in the general fund. That brings me to our property tax. So property taxes are an amount based on the valuation of the property. For all of our residents at home, we like to share that that valuation is established by the county. It is not established by the city, and it is generally less than you could sell your house for on the market. And it's based on a number of comps and some statistics that they have and different maps that they utilize. But for the property taxes that they levy on our behalf, the uncollected amount is tied to the property. So that is a very certain number for us. So when we set the property tax levy, we know that that's a number we will receive. The amount will be, it can be paid through your escrow account along with your mortgage payment if you have a mortgage payment. Otherwise, if you don't, you would be paying the county directly twice a year for those. The primary property tax is only in the general fund for general fund services. Those levy amounts and rates are adopted annually by council, and we often take you through that policy decision as we will this evening. The property tax in 2013 was set to collect $6.3 million. Through fiscal year 2018, that number has only increased to $7.4 million over that time. So the property tax has some restrictions on its increase, and those are governed by the Arizona Revised Statutes 42-17107. It requires the truth in taxation notice for any levy increase, not rate increase, levy amount increase, the total dollar amount. And so we are required to post notice of that on it for our calendar. It would be May 22nd and May 29th of this year should we change the levy amount. A unanimous vote is now required. This is new for, as of last fiscal year, for a 15% increase or more in the rate. We have an amount that we are allowed to increase. It also requires a 60-day notice requirement for the rate increase, and the notice would be on April 20th. We would post that on the city's website. Those truth and taxation notices go in the newspaper, and the form for the truth and taxation notice is prescribed very literally, very specifically in state statute, including the width of the border that must be around this notice. And so the language is dictated by the state, and it has been confusing to the public in the past, but we will endeavor to provide that education and provide that training as we go through this process. So we have a number of options. The current property tax rate is set at 0.7591. The fiscal year 2019 property tax rate, we have put before you a number of options. One of those options is to keep the current levy amount plus growth. So the levy amount is the amount of taxes that were paid by the residents in the current fiscal year without respect to the rate, just the total dollar amount. And then we are allowed to pick up the amount for growth. So if we had any new businesses that were newly assessed or new homes that were newly assessed for next fiscal year, if you pick up the amount for their growth, you pick up $137,100. So that would be giving them the same tax contribution that our current businesses and residents have. And so if you were to undertake that, there would not be a truth in taxation posting requirement. And it does not considered to be a rate increase. So we're maintaining the levy amount, adding growth. And it does not require a unanimous vote, just a majority vote. As an alternative, another option that the council could choose to pursue is to keep the rate. With the rate currently set at 0.7591, it would generate a tax levy of almost million, which would be an increase in the levy of $448,000. So because that total levy amount increases, it does trigger the truth in taxation requirements. It triggers those publications in the newspaper that would state that there's a tax increase. And it also requires a majority vote. The increase of less than 15% puts us right at 0.8385. The levy would be approximately $8.7 million. It would be an increase to the city of $1.3 million, and it would trigger the truth in taxation notice for an increase in the levy amount. It also is a rate increase, and it only requires majority vote. If we cross that threshold and we move to the maximum rate that's allowed by law, which is a 2% over the prior year's allowable amount, not the prior year's actual levy, but the allowable amount, it's just an inflation factor of 2%, that would put us at 0.9555, and it would generate a total levy of approximately $9.9 million. So we have $2.5 million capacity before we reach our maximum allowable levy. It does trigger truth in taxation. It is a rate increase and would require a unanimous vote. And so as we move through that table, these were just some options that we put out there, but the universe of tax rates between 0.7291 and 0.9555 is obviously fairly wide. So we put the note that each penny equates to approximately $100,000 change in the rate from or change in the levy amount from the current fiscal year.
And I've got a question. I've got several. We'll start with Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Lindsay, good job on this presentation, really. Just one question. Do you have a comparison table in terms of how we stand as a city versus other cities in Maricopa County or West Valley in terms of sales tax rates and the property tax rate? Oh, there you go. Boy, you really got it.
I sure do. Holly was anticipating that question.
We've had these questions before.
Very cool.
Well done.
Okay. So we're at 2.2. So we're about split. We're right in the middle, aren't we?
We certainly are. And this is not every city in Maricopa County, but we consistently use these same cities for comparison.
Well, this is a good sample. Yeah. Good. So Buckeyes 3%, huh? Wow.
And this also doesn't show that
Where's Goodyear? Goodyear's 2.5.
there's 3 cities that don't have a food tax, and Surprise is one of those. So that doesn't show the food tax in there as well.
Oh, that's right.
So,
okay, we're the only ones that don't have it.
Us, Phoenix, and Mesa, I believe, are the
Phoenix
ones that
and
do
Mesa.
not.
Yeah.
I think Phoenix actually phased theirs out over the last couple of years.
I think you're right. Yeah.
But they did have one because they had a significant challenge.
Yeah.
And they reinstated their food tax and then phased it back out. So did that go into effect last year, or
Losing track of the years. I feel like it was the year
It
before.
seems like it's gone by so fast, but
Yeah.
it is a significant thing that we have maintained our commitment to stay away from the food tax.
Right.
So,
Linz, could you send that to us electronically, just
Yes,
so we
sir.
have it?
Yes.
Because I get asked that every once in a while, how we compare. What about the property tax rate? Do we have that?
Oops, wrong way.
It's hiding.
See what you did? Now you broke it.
So
okay.
this has the property tax rate, Madam Chair, Councilmember Hall. We have both the primary and the secondary tax rates overlaid on this graph.
Good.
We have
Good.
included for
That's
the
the way to
city.
do it.
Yes, we have included new for fiscal year 2019 for the city of Surprise, the secondary property tax in the blue bar that is anticipated for our general obligation bond issue of
Okay.
approximately 0.46.
And this
0.44.
reflects 0.7591.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Could you send that to us too?
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. Yeah, very good job.
Thank you.
thank you. Vice Mayor Remley.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is, why do we have these options that we're being presented with?
Madam Chair, Vice Mayor, as part of our regular procedures, as part of the budget annually, we present these options for the mayor and council's consideration. And so looking for direction on the number to build into the budget for fiscal year 2019.
Well, every one of the options present that we're going to get a little more revenues or a lot more revenues than we were currently getting. So are we planning on spending more money next year? Is that what we're wanting to do?
Madam Chair, Vice Mayor, in most occasions, you could see that we typically have rises in expense, both from trend as well as additional need. And we will look to that as we're building the budget. So listening to you throughout the year, listening to your interest and what you would like built into the budget, and attempting to do so with your direction.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if you want to dial back to where you were in the presentation, we'll move forward.
Okay. Madam Chair, members of the council, we don't actually have another opportunity in the work session discussions prior to the publication of the city manager's recommended budget to have a discussion on the property tax rate. So if it's your pleasure, we'd be happy to take direction this evening.
So at this time, you're looking for some head nods and a little guidance to give our staff how to build the budget in terms of how much capacity we will have in comparison to last year.
Yes.
And how we move forward. So I will take some recommendations from council. We'll start with Vice Mayor Remley.
You know, it's like we're buying a pig in a poke sack at this moment because we don't know what the expense needs are. And you're asking us to say, oh, well, do we need to raise taxes to satisfy the expense needs? It's like a pig in a poke sack. For me, it's very difficult. However, we currently have among the lowest of the primary tax rates here in Surprise with the 7591. Actually, to keep the levy and the growth thing would be actually a tax cut, which if we have any inflation at all, and I believe our inflation is running a little over 3% nationally, I would have to think we're running about that or more. All that we have, if we keep the rate the way it is, we're saying that our property tax is keeping up with basically the overall inflation because our houses are becoming a little more valuable as a result of inflation, if nothing else. And it also, we're growing as a city, so that's about 140,000 component out of the 448 right there. I'm just pulling a number out of the air, but I think I'm pretty close.
That's correct.
So if we kept our rate the same, it would seem to me that on an even keel, we really haven't done anything except that we're just providing a little more for inflation. But I think it's noteworthy for the public to understand that our overall budget is not $7.8 million. Our overall budget comes out close to a third of $1 billion for the city.
That's correct.
And this is but a drop in the bucket when it comes to providing the services. So we as a city are growing and we have more rooftops every year. And if we're going to keep up with providing the services to those rooftops, even this is not going to provide for the services of the new rooftops that we have from this year. We're going to have to get it from other places as well. That's my comment.
So Vice Mayor, it sounds like you're advocating for keeping the rate the same.
Certainly not lowering it.
Okay, very good. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I think we ought to keep the rate the same, but I also want to remind everybody, because I asked Lindsay about this, that last year we funded 22 additional public safety positions.
Yes, sir.
22. We put a CAP office in to help with people that need help. Okay. We did a joint use of Ottawa city facilities. We did Surprise Farms landscaping and fencing removal.
Mm-hmm.
We did shade structures at several parks. We did additional pickleball courts. We did the 8-acre park fencing. And we did and we did all that without asking for more taxes at all. We used additional funds to add quality of life issues for our residents. Okay, I think it's noteworthy to bring that up. And I thank you for giving me a list, because we forget this, what we do sometimes. And it's a good reminder, of what we did without raising taxes. We added all those quality of life issues for our residents, which I think is very meaningful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. So can I take that? I can take that. That is a
Yes.
keep the rate the same. Councilmember Winters.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I don't have an appetite for an increase in our property tax, and I think the 0.7591, same as it has been, I think would be good. Councilman Hall is correct. We did a lot. Well, I say you guys, our staff, did a lot last year with the money we had, with no increase in taxes, and I gave you kudos. Everybody from the city manager right down to our parks people, because we did a lot last year, and I think the people are really grateful that they got that much. And Councilman Hall's right. It goes to the quality of life. And I think Surprise is a great place to live, and the people tell me all the time. Thanks to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Duffy.
Thank you, Mayor. I also want to say good job on the presentation. And as far as my opinion goes, considering the residents of this city just trusted us enough to pass a bond, I'm not sure raising rates would be a very smart idea. And it would not a very good thank you. So it's definitely not a road I would want to go down. I wouldn't even want to entertain the idea of going down it. So other than that,
So you keep the rate the same.
I would keep it the same.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Councilmember Tandy.
Thanks. I liked what the Vice Mayor said. We still need to see the rest of the budget come down on a final decision on this. But I've always tried to be a fiscal conservative, and so far since I've been on council, we've held the rate the same most of these times and went down one of the years. So I think we're pretty consistent here up on council where we're going. One thing I like to do is put it in perspective. So say an average assessed value of a $200,000 home, what does that make it to? I know what the number is, but what does that make it to a homeowner? How much would that be per year in taxes at keeping the rate the same at 7,591?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Tandy. So for a $100,000 home, it's approximately $76. So for a $200,000 home, we double that. And if I can do my math on the spot, we're at $152. If I do that correctly, $152 for $152 for the city of Surprise for the primary property tax for the fiscal year.
Okay. And I think people see their total tax bill and they don't realize that only a very small portion of that actually is coming to the city. So when we make these decisions, it's not going to sway their tax bill one way or another a whole lot more than a couple dollars probably. But that $200,000 house would be about $12.65 a month. I think most of us are in HOAs, and that's a fraction of what my HOA payment is. So I like people to put it in perspective. And what you're getting for this is you're getting part of the police and fire and all kinds of things, the services that we all need. I don't think any one of us would want to do without it. But we also, if we have future needs as we grow as a city, my desire is that our rates are in that sweet spot where we can grow, and the growth in keeping at the same rates can bring in enough revenue to provide the additional services. Because as we grow, we're going to need more police officers, more fire officials, more people working for our public works director, taking care of streets, and we need to keep up. And I would hate to have us fall behind on those things. So that's why it's important for us to hear the rest of the presentation before we really finally weigh in. But in perspective, this is a very small portion of the city funding, and also every dollar is a dollar, but it's still, I want people to see it in perspective. Thanks.
Councilwoman Hayden, would like to get your guidance, your thoughts?
I feel that with last year having the bond, that I don't think it would be a good time to have that grow and be more cost to the constituents. I really believe it should stay as it is. We seem to be doing really well with it, and you're able to move money around magically. So I think stay as it is.
Thank you, Councilwoman. So, and I too, I agree with, it seems like we're in unison. We agree that we ought to keep the rate the same. We have been able to do a lot with really in the real world is very little. When you think about that difference between growth and keeping the rate the same, and overall picture that it's $250 million budget, and we're talking about pennies here in comparison, but it still gives us the flexibility to grow and to invest in those quality of life items that are so important in terms of growing the brand of the City of Surprise. So I think that's critical. The only other piece that worries me, truly worries me, is inflation. And we've been down this road before, every city has, and just watching the environment right now, it concerns me, and I don't want to be in a situation where we can't even keep up with inflation. So I think keeping the rate the same is wise. We're not making a commitment on that tonight, but I think what we're making is let's start there. Tell us what your needs are, and we will make a final decision here in the next couple of weeks. But I think you're getting in unison from the council that we're pleased with the direction that we've taken, and that with just keeping the rate the same, it still gives us a little bit of flexibility in terms of inflation and quality of life investments. And that's important to all of us. So I think you got your guidance on this one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Council, we truly appreciate the feedback and the direction. We will incorporate the current rate into the city manager's recommended budget. And as you stated, we do have another opportunity to revisit, and there is a formal adoption process that comes in May and June with the adoption of the tentative budget, the final budget, and the property tax levy there in June. And so appreciate the direction, and that will allow us to move forward to help us build the budget.
Very good. Thank you.
With that, we will move on to the next category, which does not have a council decision. It is the franchise fees and business licenses. These are fees to conduct utility business within the city. These are where the utility providers have their lines, whether they are water lines, electric lines, gas lines, within the city's right-of-way, whether above ground or below ground. That includes the city's utilities as well. Council authorizes the agreement with the utility through the formal adoption. These are very long-term utility agreements. They're anywhere from 25 to 30 years or more. Also in this category are business licenses. As you know, we invited you to revisit those business license fees. We made a decrease in the business license fees for renewals and adjusted the initial business license fee commensurate with the effort. The council authority takes 60 days to change those business license fees or any utility fees. We most recently updated several of those franchise fees, those franchise licenses, so we do not have any franchise licenses that we will be bringing before the council in the near term. So no decision there. Those franchise fees, you can see they tend to take pace with the rates that the utility provider charges, as well as with different seasonality, whether with a gas utility is a warmer winter, the utility may be down. If we have a drier summer, a water utility may be up. And so we monitor those trends, and we saw a change from fiscal year 2013 of $4.8 million through fiscal year 2018 budget of approximately 5.8. And as you recall, we talk often about the transfers in that we receive from our utilities. We just talked about those franchise fees and haulers licenses. We also have indirect cost assessments. So services are provided by the general fund on behalf of our utilities. Those include human resources. They might be payroll, IT related. We charge those utilities for those services just as any private utility would experience those services as well. And they reimburse the general fund for those costs. Another similar assessment is an in lieu property tax. A private utility pays a property tax, so too do our utilities through this in lieu payment. That is $6.4 million, and we are not inviting any council decisions or direction on this. These are rate-based, and along with the other rate decisions you've made. The transfers in have changed from fiscal year 2013 of $4.7 million through fiscal year 2018 of $6.4 million. So the key issues for this presentation and for the general fund, Holly went through the reserves for you. We made the change to the reserve policy last year. We're not suggesting any changes to the reserve policy for this fiscal year. As she mentioned, those reserves grow since they are a percent. As the budget grows, those reserves grow. And we like to balance the amount that we hold in reserve with the amount that we are taxing the public to ensure that we aren't overtaxing to hold money in reserve. But we like to strike that balance. We've talked about the city's reliance on the general fund and how important it is relative to the payment of not only our operations, but as well to our asset replacement, vehicle replacement, and some of our smaller capital projects not funded by the general obligation bond. We've gone through those general fund sources, and we talked about some fiscal year 2018 estimates that are key to determining those one-time uses. We talked about those charges for services and the recreation fees that we anticipate bringing before council for a decision during the fiscal year 2019. And we talked about the property tax rates, and we are actually working on this fund as we are with our utilities. It is impacted on the other side, but with our indirect cost update. The upcoming calendar, as we've mentioned before, we have work sessions through the month of April. We have up next our capital improvements and development impact fee update. And then the next meeting thereafter, we'll be talking about the new funds of the ambulance and sports and tourism enterprises. We will be issuing the city manager's recommended budget and discussing it then on April 17th. The tentative budget adoption is planned for May 1st and 2 meetings in June for both the final budget adoption and the primary property tax levy and the secondary property tax levy. With that, we'd be happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Very good. We'll start with Vice Mayor Remley.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one burning question. The issues is reserves. One of the biggest things that's going to be going on this year is that some of the bond money is going to be expended in some of the capital projects that are beginning now. When we're issuing bonds, we have rating agencies that rate our bonds. And they rate our bonds due to a number of different criteria that they apply to the city. So my question is, concerning reserves, what have the rating agencies' comments been concerning the adequacy of our reserves?
Madam Chair, Vice Mayor, thank you. That is a great question. The rating agencies like the reserves that we have. They're sound fiscal reserves. Rating agencies would always encourage more reserves, but as I suggested before, we have to strike that balance between levying taxes to hold them in abeyance and using them for their intended uses. So the rating agencies always prefer more, but they are satisfied with these so far, and we'd like to offer to them this year that we have broken it into the 3 components for the general fund, including how they may be used and how long for their replenishment. And so we believe that that'll be a strong improvement in our reserves for our next rating update, which we have actually coming up in the next few months. And so we believe that that will be favorably looked upon by the rating agencies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? You did a great job. Thank you both. It was a great presentation and very helpful to move us to the next step.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
a lot. Okay, with that, we have no further business in the workshop. So with that, I'll entertain a motion.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion is made and seconded to adjourn this meeting. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned.